You're live.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us for the Joint Committee on Pensions. I'm Senator Michael Jackson, along with my co-host, co-chair, Delegate Catherine Forbes from the House. Today's November 16th meeting, virtual meeting of the Joint Pensions Committee. I'm going to call the meeting to order. The order of our agenda is the board requested legislation in the 2023 actuarial valuation and 2025 contribution rates. And we will have brief discussions and closing remarks. So, Madam Chair, do you have anything before we get started?
I just thank the staff for the preparation for the materials for this meeting. They were really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much as well. So, Ms. Gothrop, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. We got a few more proposals than we usually do for you, so let's jump right in. The first has to do with our personal statement of benefits, or our PSBs, which you all should be familiar with because you get them as members of the Legislative Pension Plan. So for the last 3 years, our active members have only received their annual PSBs through logging into their active MySRPS accounts. We're hoping that the PSB we issued in September will be their last PSB from the agency. The PSB includes the service the member has earned as of June 30th of each year, the member's projected vesting, normal, and early service retirement dates, and the projected service retirement benefit the member will receive at the time of retirement. We provide this information to the active members, like I said, in September of each year. And as I also just mentioned, this information is as of the immediately preceding June 30th. So as a result, our active members are receiving information that is 2 to 2.5 months old when they get their PSBs. The primary purpose of a member's MySRPS account is to provide them with the most up-to-date retirement information available. So what we're really hoping for, what we want to encourage, is our members to go onto their MySRPS accounts on July 1st of each year and check out what their benefits were at the close of the last fiscal year, which is just the day before, and not in September, which is 2.5 months after the close of that fiscal year. We're hoping this incentivizes more active members to set up their MySRPS accounts. Currently, we have 45 to 46% of our active membership signed up. We're hoping to get that up higher. We're planning on letting our active members know about this change through a postcard mailing next summer, posting on our website, including articles in our active newsletters, our active member newsletters, and then also working with our retirement coordinators and HR departments for each of the participating employers to help them get the word out also. So that is our first proposal. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Before we go to any questions or comments, I will say that I will assist you in any way possible, as we did from the start, to make sure that members understand this opportunity.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just take a moment here to plug MySRPS to all of you. If you have not signed up for your MySRPS account, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, and we will get you PIN numbers, temporary passwords to get you logged on. This really, I shouldn't say this with my director on here, but I have lost hours of my life on this account, looking at all my information and what my retirement benefits will be. So I cannot encourage it enough.
Thank you. We will certainly help.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, could we make
yes,
that?
Madam Chair.
Could we make that available to all of us? I am a retiree, and I'd be interested in getting that information.
Senator Benson, I'm putting you on the list. I will see that you get the necessary information to set up the account.
Thank you very much.
Senator Hedelman, you also? All right.
Delegate Metzger as well.
Embarrassingly so. Me too.
I would say, Ms. Ann, if you could.
I can look you all up, and if I don't have an active account, you'll be getting something in the mail from us in the next week or so.
And we will continue to we will continue to encourage the members and during our meetings to remind their colleagues It works. I've used it since, since we started it, I believe.
Yep.
It's worked.
Okay, so
Question?
no questions? All right. Next, we have a proposal for a couple technical changes. The first technical change has to do with the CPI that we use when we calculate the retirees' COLAs. The current definition under state personnel and pensions provides that, in part, that the CPI, to calculate this, we used 1967 as the base year for determining the CPI. The problem is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or the BLS, if you're in the know, retired the 1967 index in 1988 and replaced it with an 82 to 84 index. The 67 index is still published by the BLS, but there's a risk that they could stop doing this at any time. We reached out to legislative services and were told that several other areas of the annotated code have already switched from using the 67 index to the 84 index. And legislative services was also extremely helpful, and they calculated for us the growth rate for the CPI for the past 10 years using both the 66 and the 82 to 84 indices, and they found that the rates were the same under each, indicating that had we been using the 82 to 84 index for the past 10 years, the retiree COLA would have been the same as the COLAs that the retirees have received using the 67 index. So making the switch will not impact their COLAs in any way. It's just providing some security so that we're not caught flat-footed and they stop publishing the 67 index.
That's straightforward enough. Is there any questions or comments? And if I don't see hands, let me know. All right, continue. Thank you.
Okay. The second technical change addresses an incorrect reference included in Senate Bill 139 from last session. Mr. Chairman, you might be familiar with this bill. This bill
Yes, ma'am.
extended participation in the Deferred Retirement Option Program, or what we call the DROP, from 5 to 7 years for members of the state police and law enforcement officers' plans. Provisions of Senate Bill 139 also provided, in part, that state troopers and law enforcement officers who were already in the DROP on the effective date of the bill, they could also extend their participation from 5 to 7 years. So this bill was not just intended for new members coming into the law enforcement or the state police plans. It was also going to benefit, it also is intended to benefit existing members in the system already in DROP. But the bill, as it was drafted, it inadvertently added that existing law enforcement members would have to leave the DROP by age 60, similar to the mandatory retirement age for state police. Because LEOPS does not have a mandatory retirement age of 60, we're recommending amending Senate Bill 139 to remove this provision.
Could you go back and clarify that for me? I didn't quite understand.
So
the increase the retirement age.
So the bill inadvertently put a mandatory retirement age on law enforcement officers' plans, and they don't have one. So we have to get rid of that because it's not in their plan. And for this particular benefit, it would require them to leave at age 60 when otherwise they would not have to.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes, I apologize for that one.
That's fine. I think that the removal of that makes all the sense in the world.
All right, reemployment of retired sheriffs. So before we dive into what our issue is with this, I think it would be helpful if I gave a little background on reemployment provisions for the committee. When a member retires from any of the several systems, except the legislative plan, because you all have your own rules, they're required to separate from all employment with a participating employer before they can begin receiving their benefits. Also, as a member prepares for retirement, they cannot have a plan already lined up to return to work immediately following the 45-day cooling off period that all retirees are required to take before accepting employment with a participating employer. This is made very clear to the member by the agency's counselors, the member's retirement coordinator, and even parts of the retirement application itself state that under no circumstances should the member's decision to retire be conditioned upon an offer of reemployment. Specifically, the member is informed during the process that that there can be no offers of reemployment. They shouldn't even be discussed by the member and a participating employer prior to retirement. So there can't be anything lined up. These reemployment restrictions come from IRS rulings and Internal Revenue Code provisions that address retirement and reemployment after retirement. While the IRS has not specifically defined what it constitutes as a bona fide separation from service, temporarily ending receipt of pay from a participating employer would not be enough, especially when it's clear from the retiree's actions that prior to retirement, they have no actual intent to resign from their position and end all employment relationships with a participating employer. So without this bona fide separation from service, the IRS could consider the individual's retirement as an in-service distribution that could result in significant tax penalties to the retiree and jeopardize our system's tax qualified status. Okay, so with all of this background laid out, here's the issue. The past year, we've learned of instances regarding county sheriffs who were running for re-election and retired from the law enforcement officers plan on October 1st, before re-election and more than 45 days before they were going to be sworn into their next term. Once they were sworn in, these re-elected sheriffs, in addition to receiving their normal service retirement from LEOPS, once again began receiving their full sheriff's salary. In these instances, the re-elected sheriffs were running unopposed. So we think it was pretty clear that they were going to get their jobs back following retirement. Staff also believes that running unopposed and retiring within days of being reelected raises serious questions about whether these individuals actually really ever intended to truly resign and retire from their positions as sheriff and discontinue any employment relationship with their employer. So because of this, we're recommending a very narrow amendment to prohibit a member of the law enforcement plan from retiring while running for re-election of sheriff. We think this amendment should really only apply to LEOPS members because, with the exception of the legislative plan, like I mentioned, it's the only plan that includes elected officials and does not have an earnings limitation.
I would agree with that. That caused a lot of consternation across the state. We had the sheriff of Charles County retired and resigned and then prepared for his election. The sheriff who from my agency did the same. So I think this will be a clarifying piece of legislation that's necessary. Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Senator. And I just had one question. Person that haven't reached retirement age, and they run for sheriff, they are elected. Now they're no longer contributing to that plan, but they keep that they're running for sheriff, and then they want to go back to working at some point in time for the sheriff's department. How would this affect that situation? Because I think that's sort of what's happened. People were like, "Well, I'm going to go ahead and just retire, and then I'll keep working as a sheriff." I just don't understand. Will this prohibit somebody if they don't have their full retirement from running from sheriff if they're part of an organization?
All right, I'm going to say back to you what I think I heard you say before I answer your question, okay?
Okay.
You're asking if there is someone who was a law enforcement officer.
Right.
They're no longer a law enforcement officer, so they're no longer in the system, but they're not contributing to the system and they're not eligible for retirement. So they're age 40 and they've got 10 years of service. And then they decide 5 years later, you know what, I want to get back in it and I want to run for sheriff. What would happen to that person?
Well, I'm also talking about what if they were a current employee and they didn't have all the time to retire and they ran for sheriff.
So they would have to, well, sheriff is a full-time job. So they would have to give up their current job and they would be enrolled as an active member in the law enforcement officers plan. They're not retired. None of these issues would come up in that situation. We're really only talking about situations where someone is eligible to retire they put their paperwork in, they actually retire while they are running for reelection. They're running unopposed, so they know they're coming back to work. They know they've got their job back. And we're saying, look, we don't have anything in the law right now that tells us that tell us you can't do that. We're asking for some guardrails here, not just to protect ourselves, but to protect the members from these tax penalties that the IRS could look at that and say, well, you really didn't ever intend to retire. I think in your situation, the example you're giving, Senator, you're not talking about someone who is actually retired. You're just saying someone is coming back, and what would happen as an active member if they took this job? Nothing would happen.
Right.
They would be enrolled in the law enforcement officer plan and they would be fine.
Okay. All right. That was of interest. And I do think, I don't think a lot of the people that are in this situation understand that they could face penalties.
That's right.
Right. I mean, I have that happen a bunch dealing with all the FOP guys. They come in, they say, well, I just got offered this job. And I'm like, you can't, aren't you still working? You can't be offered that job. You got to have that 45-day separation. So, even though I think we pointed out to them, I think, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Don't see any. Ms. Ann?
Okay, let's talk about cleaning up Title 37. Title 37 of the State Personnel and Pensions article, it governs the transfer of service credit for members from a state or local retirement or pension system to another state or local retirement and pension system. So this governs members transferring from a state system to another state system, from a state system to a county system, to a county system to a state system, or even a county to a county system. It governs moving between any public pension plan within the state, back and forth. We have found two provisions within Title 37 that believe we have issues that we're recommending they be addressed. The first recommendation would correct an incorrect reference to the law enforcement officer's pension system member contribution rate. We're recommending putting the correct contribution rate in law. The second issue has to do with the 5-year period immediately following a Title 37 transfer. Current provisions in Title 37 provide that if an individual retires within 5 years after transferring into a new system, at the time of retirement, the benefits payable with respect to that transferred service credit must be calculated using the benefit formula that was in effect in the old system when that service credit was earned. I give an example in my write-up that talks about an individual who joins the employee system at age 61 and transfers 6 years of service from their old plan into the employee's pension system. They work another 4 years. Now they're 65. They've had enough. They want to go to retire because they have their 10 years of service. To calculate this individual's benefit, staff for the agency would need to determine first what the benefit formula was in the old plan for the period of time the member transferred and calculate the member's benefit under that formula for those 6 years that were transferred in. Next, staff has to calculate the member's benefit based on the 4 years earned in the employee system and then add those two benefit calculations together. So this is absolutely insane when you think about the administrative difficulties to implement this provision. For starters, all of this has to be done manually. Once a member transfers service into one of our systems, any of the systems of the state, the transferred service from the old system is indistinguishable from the earned service in the new system. Staff would need to flag every account where a transfer was completed, and then at the time of retirement, manually break apart the service between the new and the old system to determine if the member had reached the 5-year threshold. And if they didn't meet the 5 years, staff would then have to manually go through the whole process of calculating the transferred service under whatever formula was in place in the old plan and add it to the calculation of the new service in our plan. And while this would be really difficult, if the transferred service were just between two state systems where we have some historical perspective on the different types of formulas, it is impossible if the transfer was from a local system to a state system or vice versa. Because of this, staff hasn't been able to implement this provision, and we're unaware of any local or retirement pension system that implements this provision. So for these reasons, we're recommending repealing the 5-year requirement for transferred service.
Any questions, anyone? Okay, good on that.
Okay, the last issue I wanted to talk to you about has to do with extraordinary salary increases. We've learned from several agencies that they have or will be completing compensation studies for their employees. Some of the agencies that have completed their studies have found that the salaries of some of their employees are significantly below the midpoint salary for similar positions, either based on neighboring states and local jurisdictions, or in some instances nationally. So to correct this, many state employees have received salary increases greater than 20%, or what's referred to as an extraordinary salary increase. And that tells you that that's how far below the midpoint these salaries have been. The write-up you all have gives you a really detailed discussion on the history of extraordinary salary increases, the legislative history of it, and how we got to be where we are. I'm not going to take any of your time with that. What's important for you to understand that under the current policy, if a member receives a salary increase greater than 20% in the 3 or 5 years used to calculate the member's average final compensation for purposes of determining their pension, the AFC, the average final compensation, will only be calculated using up to 20% of the increase. Anything above that is not included in the calculation, so the member will not get the benefit for the full increase, only up to 20%. Exceptions to this include if the salary increase is as a result of a promotion, or if it's as a result of an appointment or election to public office. In those cases, if the increase is more than 20%, the member would get the full benefit of that calculated into their retirement. At the time of retirement, if we are made aware of a salary increase that is greater than 20% that doesn't fall under one of these exemptions, we let the member know that the amount above 20% will not be included in the calculation of their benefit, and inform them that they can appeal this decision in writing, explaining why they disagree with staff's findings. What happens then is the report that was sent to the member and the member's written response is then sent to our full board, where our board will decide if they believe the member received an extraordinary increase. These reviews happen really infrequently right now. The last one occurred in August of 22, and it was just one. It wasn't like we got 7 or 8 coming in. It was just for one person. Since then, we've received salary increase data from 2 agencies, not requests for retirement. We've just received this data from 2 agencies that have performed compensation studies in recent years. Agency X performed a study on its whole agency looking at comparable positions of neighboring states to Maryland and local jurisdictions within Maryland. As a result of this study, 13 of their employees received increases greater than 20% who were also eligible to retire immediately. So if these 13 were to retire today, their AFC would not include any amount of the salary increase above 20%. Agency Y compared the compensation of a certain group within the agency with comparable positions nationally. This agency had only one individual who received a salary increase greater than 20% and who was also eligible to retire immediately. Under current agency regulations, the board is not permitted to provide an exemption for extraordinary salary increases for an agency as a whole in advance of a member retiring. So what this means is the board can't give blanket exemptions to groups of employees in advance of their retirement. The board can only grant an exemption on a case-by-case basis and only at the time the individual retires. So staff believes that due to the potentially higher number of increases resulting from compensation studies that might be flagged in the future and the potential fiscal impact this change in the policy could have for the state, any changes to this policy really should come at the direction of the legislature. Because of this, we're bringing this issue to your attention to determine if you feel any policy changes are necessary. I've included 3 options in my write-up, and I'll go through them all briefly that you might want to consider. Your staff may come up with other options for you. The first option that we included, it was maintaining the status quo. So by maintaining the existing policy, while likely creating more work for the board and the agency, it could serve as an incentive for members to stay with the current employer for at least 3 or 5 more years, depending on when they join the system, in order to get the full benefit of the increase. You could also consider unlinking these types of salary increases to the period of time of a member's AFC is calculated. So for example, instead of limiting any increase that occurs in the 3 to 5 years used to calculate a member's benefit, that period of time could be reduced for all members to just the last 2 years of employment prior to retirement. This option would result in all members, regardless of when they joined the system, they would all be treated the same. while slightly reducing the period of time a member would have to continue to work after getting the full benefit of their increase. Alternatively, or maybe even in addition to, you may want to increase the 20% cap to 30% to allow a member to benefit from more of the salary increase they may receive as they near retirement. And then finally, I really think it was unlikely that the types of compensation studies and the volume of these studies that we're seeing right now was ever really contemplated when the existing provisions were governing these types of increases were introduced in 1972. So the Joint Committee could also just consider including a new exemption for extraordinary salary increases that occur as a result of formal compensation studies. If this is an option you all are interested in pursuing, we really would encourage you to reach out to DBN to discuss any potential legislation, because compensation studies are personnel related, and so they would probably want to have a say in it. Additionally, we would also encourage you to consult your actuary on the fiscal impact to the state for any of these options. And of course, we are always here to help. We would welcome helping in any way we can in drafting the legislation and working with you on it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Senator Hedelman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you. The theory behind capping it at 20%.
So I think when I looked at the legislative history, it really was to stop giving someone just a windfall right at the end of their retirement, right at the end of their career. So if you had someone who was very close with their director and they thought, okay, I'm just going to bump your salary way up, they capped it at 20%. And that is not insignificant. That's still a lot. It's a huge increase that you're getting factored into your retirement.
So it was to deter kind of golden parachutes out the door.
That's right.
Not quite, but almost.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Any more, Ms. Ann?
That's it.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay. All right. We will certainly take these under advisement, and particularly on this last one with contacting DBM and the others. Thank you. So, members, we'll move on to actuary. Do we have them up?
Hello.
Good afternoon.
We're doing just a sound check. Is my voice carrying okay? Oh, sorry.
I can hear you and I can see your document.
I think yes, there it is. Okay. Should I go ahead?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So I'm Brian Murphy, and I'm here with Brad Armstrong. We're going to take you through the results of the June 30th, 2023 valuation of the Maryland State Retirement and Pension System.
Is Martin on as well, or not?
He is not with us. I believe he's in his office.
Okay, no problem. No problem.
I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah.
Hello, Martin. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good to see you again today.
Okay. So this is a study that we do, once a year, each year. We use data as of June 30th. We have data on the people in the plan, the assets in the plan. We make assumptions about what might happen in the future, and then we put it into sort of the actuarial machine. And the actuarial machine tells us things like what the plan's funded ratio is. It tells us what the plan's unfunded liability is, and it tells us the contribution rate that will be required for fiscal year 2025. So you'll see there's a 1-year time lag between the date of the valuation and the year when it actually has an effect upon the state budget. And so if we could go to the next slide. Okay, this is just a table of contents. I'm going to talk about the background on the participant data, and then Brad is going to pick up and he's going to tell you about the assets and the results and the conclusions that we draw from it. Before I actually start, can we go to the next slide now, just the background slide. Before I actually start on the background, I want to tell you 3 numbers. And I won't really tell you what they mean. Brad will tell you what they mean, but you can watch for them as you go through his presentation. But at least in my opinion, these are sort of the 3 important numbers in the whole report. And you're going to see a sea of numbers, by the way. But these are the 3 that you should try to remember. If you were at a cocktail party and somebody asked you something about the retirement system, these are the numbers you'd want to know. So the first one is 75%. And that's a rounded number, but we call that the funded ratio. The next one is the unfunded liabilities, $21 billion. So we're 75% funded. We've got 21 billion, yet to go. And the third number is the fiscal 25 contribution rate for the state, which is $2.1 billion. So 3 numbers.
I'm sorry, we don't see any of that.
Yeah, they're not there. I'm just telling you to remember them and write them down. You will see them when Brad goes through his presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
So
That was a voice, Brian, excuse me, that was a voice from an educator. So she was thinking you were quizzing her. So
the quiz comes later because the puzzle is going to be find these numbers in what Brad's going to talk about. I'll just repeat them again. Funded ratio of 75%. That's probably the most important one that you're likely ever to get asked. What's your system's funded ratio? The next one is the unfunded liability, $21 billion. The third one is the fiscal 25 contribution, $2.1 billion. So just those are 3 important numbers. Watch for them as Brad talks about it. And now we can kind of go on to the next slide. All right, so the purpose of the valuation, measure the financial position of Maryland State Retirement System. And that's essentially figure out the 3 numbers that we just told you. The second one is to provide the board of trustees of the system with state and PGU contribution rates for certification. PGU, what's that? Well, the retirement system covers mostly state employees, but we also cover what we call participating governmental units, so municipalities in the state of Maryland that are in the system. So PGU, participating governmental units, they have separate contribution rates. It's not part of the state contribution, but our report covers both. We provide financial reporting information in accordance with what's known as the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. And they have 2 statements that are important for pension systems, Statement 67 for the system and Statement 68 for the employers. And then finally, analyze experience over the last year. So that means not only tell you where you are, but kind of tell you how you got there from where you were a year ago. So that's what this is about. And now we'll go into our objectives on the next slide. So these are 4 objectives that are important for retirement systems. And the first one is benefit security. We want to pay the benefits that people expect to get based upon present statutes and all of that. We don't want to, go back on that. So security of benefits is paramount. We want people to get the pensions that they've worked hard for and deserve. The next one is we would like contribution rates to be stable from one year to the next. Ideally, the contribution rate would be stable as a percentage of pay year in and year out, and only fluctuate by minor amounts. This year, it changed by a fair amount, having to do with large pay increases that we give and other aspects of experience, which Brad also will be talking about. Was there a question? No, okay. The third one is intergenerational equity. Ideally, in the operation of the retirement system, we would like each generation of taxpayers to pay for the pensions of the generation of employees that serve them. So we'd like to have sort of, everybody pay their own costs is what we'd like. And the final thing is we'd like to have a stable or increasing ratio of assets to liabilities. That funded ratio that we talked about, we'd like it to rise steadily for year in and year out as it hits 100%. It actually dropped a little bit this year. We would hope in the long run that's not a consistent drop, that it will eventually be reversed as we continue toward investment return and all of that stuff. We will be doing, I mentioned at the beginning that we make a lot of assumptions, because it doesn't just matter like what's the money you have today, what's the people you have today and all that. It matters how the future is going to unfold. So we make assumptions about the future. We say, when will people retire? How long will they live? Will some of them get disabled before they retire? What will the fund earn on its investments? What will inflation? All of those things, and we review those periodically in conjunction with what's called an experience study. There's one that's scheduled for the very near future, and by virtue of that study, it helps us with this objective 3 of maintaining intergenerational equity. And we kind of true up the assumptions and make sure that as best we can figure out, we think that people are paying. The next slide, if we could go to that, please. So the primary assumptions for 2023, and there were no changes from last time. This is because the experience study happens in the future, not the past. So the most important one is we're assuming 6.8% investment return. We also assume that the payroll will grow each year by 2.75%, and we assume that prices will rise about 2.25% per year. The other ones are kind of technical. We make assumptions about COLAs that various cohorts of employees will get. We have to build in the 2011 reforms and the effect they had on COLAs, and that sort of thing. The second main bullet there talks about the assets. I think we all know, and we've seen in the past, that the market value of assets changes a lot in the short term, and it backtracks and it jumps ahead and it goes down, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 4 steps back, and so forth and so on. So we smooth those assets out, sort of recognizing not just the current market value of assets, but how they behave over time. And there are formulas for that are sort of standard actuarial practice. Then the final thing is demographic assumptions. And the one that people talk about, and that's another one that comes up when you're asked is, what are you doing with mortality? Because mortality assumptions are important. It determines how long people will live, how long they'll draw benefits, and all of that. And so we use a standard mortality table for the public sector, which is what it says there. Next slide. And by the way, I have a tendency to talk kind of fast, but certainly if there are questions or if I'm talking too fast, if someone were to say, Brian, slow down, I won't be insulted. And if you have questions to ask, please go ahead. We'll be glad to take them as we go.
Brian, thank you for that invitation. Just a quick question for you. As we look at the actuarial assumptions on the demographic bullet, is there any assessment of those who are coming into the system and then leaving prematurely, right? Either right after 10 years or just before, and the impact?
One of the assumptions that we make, we call it a turnover assumption. So we make assumptions about, each year the probability that a person with a given age of service will quit and go elsewhere and leave the system. And that assumption we study every couple of years in conjunction with an experience study and true it up. And we'll have an update for that when we finish the experience study that we're about to embark on now, on how that works over time.
Yeah, we appreciate that. And if you could ensure that we get that, I'd appreciate it.
We'll do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, that's one of the important assumptions. Obviously, if a lot of people quit, then the costs are lower than we think. And so we do the best we can to take that into account in the valuations. Okay. This slide is entitled Variables Affecting Valuation Results. And I'll just go over a couple of these. The first one is the benefits. I mean, the benefits that people are going to get, the benefit formula, it differs by, which plan you're in, state police or teachers or whatever. We have to know what those are. And then it's not only the benefits according to the formula, but it's these assumptions about, will you actually get them or will you terminate employment before retirement? There's actual past experience. That's a big one. What happened in the past, all these people retired, they're on the rolls. We have to pay their benefits. The other one is recent legislative changes. There were 2 that happened in the last General Assembly. Senate Bill 139 in 2023, which made a minor change to the drop plan that affects state police and LEOPS. The number of years of participation was extended from 5 to 7. The second one is that the 2000 Senate Bill 466, which also passed, this was a change in the funding method And this was an important change for us that we really appreciate that the legislature made this change. This implements what we call layered amortization. Before that change, we were on a target to go to 100% funded exactly in 2039. And that sounds good in principle. That's where we want to be. Yes, it is. And the way it was structured, though, the way we were doing it, each year we have one less year over which to fund any unfunded liabilities. So if we were to get to 2038, and all of a sudden there was a loss, we'd have no way to fund it. So this layered amortization says, let's close off the unfunded liability as of June 30th of 2023, fund that absolutely down to zero. New liabilities that show up due to things like gains and losses and subsequent changes and so forth, fund them over new periods, new closed periods, so that we know that objective of 100% funding of the 2023 liabilities will be met in 2039 if contributions are made according to schedule. So those are the two big changes from this year. Actually, only one of them is a big change, and neither had any significant effect on the results of this particular evaluation. So next slide. This slide just kind of outlines what the funding policy is, and it's a technical slide. But just so that to have it on the documentation, we use, in order to determine contribution rates and liabilities, we use what's called the entry age actuarial cost method. What you need to know about that is that that's designed to produce level percentage of payroll costs over long periods of time. That's how it's supposed to work. The next one is that we smooth assets over a 5-year period. We made a little change in 2021 that was temporary, but basically each year's gain or loss is smoothed over the current year and 4 future years. Then the third bullet outlines this amortization policy that I just talked about, and it talks about how the layered amortization is actually implemented technically. I don't plan to go into that unless somebody has a particular question, but just so it's there on the documentation. Any questions up to this point?
I do not see any hands. Okay, thank you.
Okay, then I have one more slide, and then I'll be turning it to Brad. The next one is on demographic data, and originally Brad was going to start on this one, but it's like my favorite slide. So if you go to the next one, please. It's like my favorite slide because I know that when we talk about the state budget and we talk about retirement system liabilities, we're talking about billions of dollars, and we can get lost in that concept of how many billions is this, and then pretty soon it seems like it's all about the money. But with this slide, what I want to focus on is that it's all about the people. And so we have, if you look at the columns here between state and municipal systems, we've got 420,000 people. Those are either retirees, vested former members, or current active members. And if you think about it, each one of them probably has a spouse or maybe a couple of kids. Really, there are probably 1 million people that are relying on this system in one way or the other. And that's just a lot of people. I would also comment that there are 174,000 current retirees. And once again, these people, they work their career for the state or for the municipality. They're counting on us for their pension. And that's why benefit security is so important. We don't want to disappoint these people. We want them to get the pensions that they've earned. To comment on a couple other things here, the valuation payroll, which is what we think the total earnings were of all the people in the system, went up by 9% this year from last year. You see that number like in the middle on the far right. And so that's a large increase in payroll. And that's for two reasons. One is that we actually have a few more active members than we had last year. The second one is that the active members that stayed got fairly significant pay increases, which will be shown later on. So that's the end of my stuff. I'm just going to remind you about the three numbers because Brad's going to start to talk. If you haven't written them down, this funded ratio is 75%, unfunded liability is $21 billion, fiscal 25 contribution is $2.1 billion. And so now watch as Brad talks to see where those numbers come up. If you have questions about them, ask Brad. He's the master of all that stuff. So Brad, here you go.
Thank you very much.
And thank you.
All right. And the same goes during my commentary, that you can certainly interrupt with any questions or clarifications. If we could move to slide 12, which is the actuarial value of assets bar chart. And we have seasonal colors here, and getting ready for the holidays. If you focus on 2022 and 2023, from last year to this year, the assets on an actuarial value basis as well as a market value basis are both up year over year, but not as much as we expected. In the text box at the bottom, and Brian mentioned this earlier, that we're smoothing the market value results over a 5-year period, so that this will assist us in meeting the contribution rate stability funding objective. So let's talk about the experience. If we go 2 more slides, the aggregate experience, and the key word in the upper left, you see aggregate experience net increase in state rates. So emphasis on rates. What we're talking about on this side is impact on the rates. So downward forces, in other words, things that would make the state contribution rates go down. Payroll increase of 8.9%. It differs slightly from the 9% that Brian mentioned, because 9% was including state and municipal payroll. This 8.9% is just looking at aggregate payroll at the state level. So that was up substantially. This decreases the rate necessary to fund the unfunded actual accrued liability. And there are more members in the reform systems. The reform systems have a little bit lower costs and a little bit lower benefit structure. So as more members are participating in the reform systems, this is a downward force. And the lower half of the slide here, the upward force is less recognized investment return. That would be the 5.51% actuarial and 3.11% on a market basis. And that compares to 6.8% that we're assuming. Individual pay increases well above expectations, especially for the employees combined system, state police and LEOPS, very substantial increases. To the extent that you have a pay-based benefit formula, if pay increases go up more than expected, then for your active population, the projected retirement benefits go up by more than expected. And finally, a lot of the COLA assumptions increased by more. In the last few years, we've seen various periods of much higher inflation than we'd seen in the last 20 years. One of those periods in particular was calendar 2022, and calendar 2022 is the basis upon which a lot of the COLAs that are effective July 1st each year are determined. So, and not shown here, I'll mention it again, but when we look at some of the next few slides, the judges, their COLAs are based on pay increases, and as opposed to price inflation. But they exceeded, their pay increases exceeded the wage inflation assumption significantly. So we move now to.
So Brian, before you move, if I might.
Sure.
So you spoke of the increase, inflation increase in 2022. If that is attributed to part of COVID or?
Well, that's just the consumer price index, the urban consumer price index. So it's basket of market goods, includes all sorts of categories, rental expenditures, grocery expenditures, transportation expenditures, things like that. And it's published by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, and talked about that particular index earlier. So it's not something that's really directly within the control of the system.
All right, thank you.
But it affects some of the benefit provisions more than others, because the state police, for example, they receive whatever the CPIU determined increase is. That's the 8.003% you see in that final bullet.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly. If you go to the next slide, the actuarially determined contribution rates, the investment losses that we talked about increased year over year, are attributable to increases for all five of the systems. All five of the systems, the assets are pooled for investment purposes. So if you have investment losses, they're going to affect each of the systems differently. Similarly, but differently. The magnitude will be different when it's converted to a rate divided by the various payrolls. In the case of ECS, I mentioned they had very substantial payroll increases. They had COLA increases, which created losses. Payroll growth was substantial, however, so it offset the majority of what the increase otherwise would have been. So you see a slight increase. State police increased the most, and that's because they have unlimited COLAs, and the state police
And a lot of retirees.
and the state police have the largest percentage of retiree liabilities of all the 5 state systems. So if the retirees are getting higher COLAs in state police, it's going to be divided by a payroll that's a smaller representation of the active population than any of the other systems. And judges, I mentioned this on the prior slide. They have payroll pay-based cost of living adjustments. So theirs went up somewhat substantially because their pays went up 5.8%. We were only assuming they would go up 2.75%. And if you move to LEOPS, they're actually, it's just a coincidence that those rates are identical year over year. The payroll growth for LEOPS completely offset the demographic losses attributable to salary increases and cost of living adjustments. So if we go to the next slide, and you're probably starting to understand what Brian meant when he said you're going to see a SEA of numbers, a sea of numbers. And here's one of those slides.
And 2 of the numbers I talked about are on this page. So while he's talking, see if you can find them.
So the increases because of investment losses, COLA is greater than expected, and salary increases higher than expected. All of those cause if you look in the total column, if you go down to the 6th row, the change in the actuarially determined contribution rates from last valuation 2022 to this valuation was 1.27% increase. Now, if you go down 2 more rows, you'll see the conversation starter at the cocktail party. That's the $21 billion unfunded accrued liability that Brian mentioned. That's an increase from.
Hey, Angela, I'm on.
That's an increase from the prior year of 2,668,000,000. And then the funded ratio, including the municipal, if you go down two more rows, you see a figure of 75.3%. And that's the second of the three figures that Brian mentioned. Unfortunately, our objective includes trending towards 100%. And we were 77.2% funded in the 2022 report. And we fell a little bit away from our objective moving forward. But as Brian mentioned, we expect that to be temporary. The contribution rates will keep self-adjusting until that reverses course and we towards 100%. If these rates are contributed, we fully expect that that trend is going to reverse itself. So if we go to the next slide, and it's another sea of numbers. I suppose if we combine them all on one slide, then we could have an ocean of numbers. But in any case, this is a reconciliation. This is a reconciliation of the employer contribution rates. The bar charts, we talked about the majority of the results. You see that teachers 2025 actuarial rate of 16.25%, for a variety of reasons, primarily the cost of living adjustments granted to their retirees and the investment losses increased their rate to 16.83. In the employees combined system, the increase in total payroll experience decreased their unfunded rate. It was equal to and offset the demographic experience, but they still had the investment loss. And so you see an increase in employees' contribution rate. State police, they saw a substantial decrease due to their total payroll increase, but it was only about half as much as the demographic loss, from the cost of living adjustments. And they also still had to adjust their contribution rate for the investment losses. So you saw a relatively large increase. And you might think, well, is there a bias? Is state police always going to have the largest increase? No, that's not the case. They're going to have the largest deviations in their contribution rates from one period to another. So if we have gains, they'll have an outside decrease, versus an outsized. I'm not enunciating very well. SIZED, outsized increase or decrease. And then the judges, I think, we talked about the various reasons. What's interesting to us to remind the Joint Committee on Pensions, if you look at that in between the last two bold rows, so you have fiscal year 2025 actuarial contribution rate, then you have two rows later final total budgeted contribution rate, and the difference there is the row titled reinvested savings rate, and judges is 0, and the reason is over 10 years ago the 2011 reforms did not affect the judges, so therefore there were never any reinvested savings that were allocated to the judges. So they somehow managed to stay out of the fray when the other 4 state systems had changes to their benefit provisions. Then if you look at LEOPS, they had some offsetting changes in the rates. The increase in total payroll offset the demographic losses due to the COLA, but they also had the change in benefit provisions where the drop was extended from 5 to 7 years was a decrease in the contribution rate that was more or less sufficient to offset the investment losses in the case of layups. So that's how the rate pretty much stayed the same year over year. And then if we go to the next slide, please. The teachers combined system portion of the contribution requirement for the teachers combined system is being.
Mr. Chair. I'm sorry. Could we go back
Yes.
could we go back to the previous slide for a minute? Just want to ask one question. Why is there such a significant difference in the contribution rates for the state police as it compares to the teachers and the other employees? Why is there such a significant difference? Can you explain to me again why it is at 86.23%? Why are the contribution rates much higher, the percentages much higher than it would be for the teachers and the other the judges and those other folks? Explain that to me again. I'm sorry, I apologize.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
That's a
I'm
good question.
sorry, Paul, but I can't talk to you right now.
There you go.
The state police have these are some of the smaller reasons, maybe not the biggest reasons, but the state police have the highest retention. So they're the most likely to make it through an entire career. Their expected careers are the shortest among the 5 systems. So what that means is that they have the most retirees, relatively speaking. So more people that they hire stay and become eligible for a pension, and ultimately go into pay status. So that costs extra money. They have shorter careers, so they have a shorter funding horizon before they go into pay status. And then we're replacing them faster. So their benefit structure is among the best of the 5 systems. You can't really fall back on that they have the highest legacy costs, because in 2000 they were overfunded. I mean, they were one of the systems that was over 100% funded. So, however, because of the exposure, so they had the most assets on a relative basis, and then the various downturns in the market, they had the most assets exposed to downturns in the market, so that
And also, and I believe also, Brian, there's another contributing factor is that they're not in Social Security, so they have a higher multiplier as well.
Benefits are higher.
right, the benefit structure is an excellent point.
Yeah, like going back to the earlier question, is lower turnover. These people don't quit at the same rates that others do. They
Yes,
have
sir.
higher benefits, as you just said, and then they have shorter careers, so you've got less time to build up the funds you need for them to retire. And then
Yes,
there's,
sir.
yeah, other smaller issues, but that's part of it.
Is that a good enough part of it that we've sufficiently answered the question as posed, Senator?
Senator Benson, does that answer your question? I can follow up with her later. Thank you.
Okay. And certainly, if you contact Ann, or if you have any questions 30 minutes after, contact Martin or Ann, and we'll certainly be accessible to them and respond.
I would just want to say, keep in mind, we're looking for one more number yet.
Yeah, the scavenger hunts. So the allocation of the contribution to the local employers, Philip is really on top of things today. Thank you, Philip. He's moving the slides for us in Annapolis. So the teachers combined system, local employers are responsible for the employer normal costs. That's a portion of the contribution requirement. And if we start on the left-hand side, the employer normal costs for fiscal 2025 at the top left in the box of numbers, column of percentages, 4.96%. The employer normal costs in the 2024 contribution was 5.04. What you're seeing there, the normal cost is drifting downward because there's more members that are entirely in the reformed benefit structure. So that went down 8 basis points. And as the turnover continues over the next 15 years, we expect that trend to continue.
I think we didn't actually define that term normal cost because it's like breadth to an actuary. We all know what it means, but in case someone in the audience doesn't, that refers to the value of 1 year's accrual of service in the system, sort of the employer finance value. So that's kind of like that's what a year's working in the system is worth in terms of pension benefits, about 5% of pay per teacher.
And thank you, Brian. And if you, another way to think of it is if you want to keep up with the liabilities, the new liabilities that are going to happen with respect to your active population and achieve intergenerational equity and attribute the services being provided or the classes being taught, the public safety protection to, the appropriate period of time, then you always want to meet that normal cost obligation. Person worked a year, they get a year's worth of credit under the system. That's their normal cost for that period. And we always want to pay that. So that portion on this slide is being paid by the local employers. Year over year, that represented about 380 million last year and 397 million this year. And that's off of the total contribution requirements. And ultimately benefits the state. The reinvested savings, the footnote here, we're reflecting the aggregate reinvested savings was cut from 75 million in fiscal 2024, an expectation of 75 million by the legislature, to 35.3 million. You don't see 35.3 million because the teachers combined system only gets an allocation. It gets the largest allocation of the reinvested savings at the 23.9 million. So it appears twice, but the second to last row, that 23.9 million is a portion of the 35.3 that we expect to receive in fiscal 24. Let's go to the next slide. So I guess one more. So the year-to-year comparison of results for the municipal systems should look fairly familiar for all the reasons we've already discussed. Employees combined system rates are up, LEOPS rates are up, the CORS rates are up the most, and that's because they have uncapped COLAs. The increase in the unfunded actuarial accrued liability for just the municipal was 217 million, and their funded ratios, recall that the aggregate funded ratios went down 1.9%. Municipal by themselves went down 2.1% from 83.8 to 81.7. And then, this with Slide 22. Now we're in the next 3 slides are basically our concluding comments. So last call are the recommended budgeted contributions for fiscal 2025. You see in the prior year would be fiscal 2024. But if you go down under fiscal 2025, these are the rates you've seen multiple times now for each of the individual systems. In bold, those were certified by the Board of Trustees at their October board meeting. And you see these dollar amounts: 2,544 million rounded to 2.5 billion. That is the total contribution, illustrative dollar amount. Recall the TCS local employers contribute the normal cost portion, roughly 400 million, and so the remainder, the total state only portion, is 2.147 billion, which rounded is 2.1 billion. That
There it is.
the third,
There it is.
the third number that Brian opened with. If we go to the next slide, these are just the rates. There's not equivalent illustrative dollar contributions because PDU, remember, those are municipal, local employers. Their contributions consist of these certified, bolded, basic pooled rates, as well as surcharges, deficits, and credits. People come in and you don't force them into the pooled rate immediately. You make an adjustment for the facts and circumstances of their membership upon entry. So those are the contribution requirements. In our final slide, the concluding comments. The experience in total was unfavorable during fiscal 2023, leading to an increase in all of the state and municipal employer contribution rates. Secondly, you should expect upward pressure on the contribution rates expected through fiscal year 2029 due to the deferred asset losses. That does not follow that the funded ratio won't improve during that period. What it doesn't imply is that the funded ratio will improve slower than if we didn't have these deferred asset losses. So the rates themselves may go up, but funding progress hopefully will resume towards 100%. And then the state systems are still targeting 100% funded ratio by 2039. The reason in prior years we said the state systems will be reaching 100% funded ratio by 2039 because we had that converging amortization schedule that was going to force gains and losses regardless of magnitude to be funded immediately in 2038, 2039. Now with the layered amortization, it's an ongoing target, but it's likely that there'll be some deviations. We still expect substantial progress towards 100% funded, no matter what.
We expect the liabilities that were reported in this valuation to be fully liquidated by 2039. It's only future things that might mess it up. So the 3 numbers anyway: funded ratio 75%, unfunded liability 21 billion, and fiscal 25 contribution 2.1 billion. Those are the numbers. And are there any other questions we can answer?
Any questions from the members? Don't see or hear any. I want to thank you, gentlemen, very much.
Thank you for your.
So for homework tonight, go through the PowerPoint and circle those three numbers where you find them.
We certainly appreciate your presentation. So we're going to move into the discussion portion now. Members, anything for discussion? Many of the members. I will turn it over to Philip for next steps and next dates. Philip?
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry. I didn't see your hand. I'm sorry.
No, I just put it up. I just wanted to let
Okay,
everyone
sorry.
know before you wrap up. Our business operations group was listening to this meeting, and while the meeting was going on, got out all of the my SRPS letters to everyone who asked for them. So please be looking for them in the mail. They are that good, our SRPS people. So
Thank you. Give them our thanks. Appreciate that. Very useful tool, ladies and gentlemen. Very useful. All right, Philip.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So next meeting, final meeting of the interim will be on Thursday, December 7th at 2 p.m. We will be virtual again. We'll have decisions based on the requested legislative proposals, and then I'll be presenting a investment overview for the 2023 fiscal year.
All right, thank you very much for guiding us today, Philip, and make sure everybody's available on the 7th. And to my co-chair, before I hand it over to you, look, I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedule. We're all busy on the interim, but as we all know, these are very important meetings that we have, and we have a dynamic team that guides us, and we have our partners with the Retirement Administration. So, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for coming, and a special shout out to Delegate Chang, who is joining us from Seoul, Korea. That's how much
Yes,
about
I
his
did see
pensions
him.
appointment.
How dedicated are those appropriation folks?
In the middle of the night. Thank you. Thank you all.
Wow. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon. Great Thanksgiving coming up, everybody.